Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first, let's talk about the Kursk direction, where the Ukrainians continued their offensive operation. During the previous days, the Russians managed to stabilize some parts of the front line, but yet the Russians haven't managed to stabilize this area completely. At some directions, the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions during the previous 12 hours. At some directions, the Russians managed to counterattack and to regain lost areas. First, let's talk about the area about Lvov direction. This is the city of Lvov, and the Ukrainians, according to information we have, were heading towards the city during the previous few days. The Russian sources published the video how they managed to ambush the Ukrainian forces in the vicinity of the village of Safonovka. We've been discussing this ambush for the previous few days, and the first videos and the first photos of this ambush we found in the internet around 3 days ago, and yesterday we got more details about this attack, and today on the 16th of August the Russian sources published a full video of how they managed to ambush the Ukrainians and to destroy the entire convoy. And also we got another video from a little bit further in the northern direction. In this video we can see the Russian positions and the Russian soldiers who were filming that ambush we've been talking about this minute ago. So very interesting geolocation and very interesting update, and very interesting question how exactly the Ukrainians managed to get there and when exactly this ambush took place. According to information we have, this ambush took place on the 12th of August. So, and after the 12th of August, we still haven't received even a single report whether the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions further or even to improve their positions inside of Safonovka. Furthermore, according to the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, most of attacks that have been taking place since the 12th of August until now were successfully repelled by the Russians. So now let's return back to this ambush, and according to information we have, according to the geolocations, the Ukrainians were moving something like this. First, they were moving, of course, from the mainland towards this intersection of the roads. Then they moved to the west to Kauchuk. Then they moved to the north, and then they will move to the west once again by passing this forest, and then move further to the west, and they reached the outskirts of Safonovka where the Ukrainian forces were ambushed. So this is approximately the road of Ukrainian movement and Ukrainian attack. And about this attack we got a lot of reports in the past. Now let's move further and let's talk about the village of Staraya Sorochina and Nikolaevka. This area, as you can see, is considered as a contested area because during the previous few days we got lots of updates about control from the Ukrainian side, about the Russian counterattacks, and today we got the video that confirms that this area still is in the gray zone or as a contested area. In this video we can see the Russian soldier and the Russian vehicles that were moving on the most outskirts of this village by the name of Nikolaevka. And the Russians discovered the abandoned Ukrainian armored vehicle, and they basically set this vehicle on fire. So as you can see, the Russians didn't have time, forces and resources to evacuate this vehicle, and they decided just to destroy it here at this point. And once again, this fact confirms that neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians control this territory, and there are still very heavy clashes. Now let's move further to Sudzha area. If you remember, during the previous days, during the previous 12 hours and during the previous video, we talk a lot about additional Ukrainian gains in the Sudzha direction. The Ukrainians captured the village of Nikolaevka. The Ukrainians captured the village of Mirne and Bandarivka. Most likely the Ukrainians captured the Sudzha, the eastern part of Sudzha, completely. And today we got additional updates from different mappers that Ukrainians managed to improve their positions further in the western direction, and that there are very heavy clashes right now in the vicinity of the village by the name of Agronom, and that the Ukrainians began assault operations to the village of Pushkarne. The Ukrainian sources, more precisely the Horn group, published the video of how they were bombing and attacking the Russian forces along this road, and after very heavy artillery preparation, the Ukrainians began their assault and they captured positions. Yet we haven't received even a single video that confirms the Ukrainian presence here. The only thing we have, is the artillery preparation, artillery attacks on the Russian forces, and the map update of more or less reliable Russian source. So according to the Russians, this yellow cloud, this territory was captured by the Ukrainians. Now let's move to the village of Makhnovka. This area used to be in contested area, but today we got the geolocation that confirms the Ukrainian presence and strong control over this territory. In this video we can see the Ukrainian personnel carrier that was abandoned by the Ukrainians in the most eastern outskirts of the village, and when the Russians discovered this abandoned vehicle, they destroyed it with the onset strike. This video confirms Ukrainian control over this territory. Now let's talk about the eastern flank. We haven't received any videos from this direction, but we have very important statement that was published by the official group of the Group of Forces North. The Russians are saying that during the previous night, during the previous 12 hours, the Ukrainians conducted a lot of attempts to attack in direction of the village of Panasovka, and that the Ukrainians were trying to attack the Russians in the village of Toretsk. So these two reports confirm that the Ukrainians are heading towards to the west. Furthermore, I'll remind you that since the beginning of the Kursk offensive, the Ukrainians made a lot of attempts to attack the village of Snagast, but most of those attacks were repelled by the Russians and the Russian reinforcement that arrived in that area for the stabilization. And now the Ukrainians are trying to bypass the village of Snagast from the south and to force the Russians to fall back. So, summarizing everything, if the Ukrainians are able to take under control everything that located to the let's say east of this yellow line, then they will be able to force the Russians to fall back from many important and strategical positions like the villages of Vishnyovka, Snagast, Komarovka, Krasnooktyabrskaya. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Toretsk, New York agglomeration. During the previous 12 hours, during the previous night of the local time, we haven't received anything, but mostly there are very heavy clashes, and most likely during this day we're going to receive additional update from pro-Ukrainian mappers, and obviously this report is going to be in Russian favor. But we got very interesting video from the village, from the outskirts of the village by the name of Azaryanivka. This front line was very calm for a very long period of time, and now, as I understand, according to the geolocations we start receiving, this territory was activated by the Russians. The Russians launched a full-scale offensive operation with the purpose to cross Seversky Donetsk-Donbas canal right exactly in the vicinity or between the villages of Kurdyumovka and Azaryanovka, and according to this video, the Russians managed to do this. The Russians captured the constructions, the different facilities on the Ukrainian side of the canal, and the Ukrainians were FPV droning the Russians exactly in this point. For now, we're not updating the map because we need additional updates and we need to understand the depth of how the Russians managed to get inside of the Ukrainian territory. Now let's move to the Pokrovsk direction, and during the previous 12 hours, during the previous night, we got a lot of very interesting updates and additional progress in Russian favor. First, let's talk about the northern flank. According to information we have, after the Russians captured the village of Svirodinivka, the Russians moved further in the northwestern direction, and the Russians captured the village of Novohrodivka. And this information was confirmed by neutral mappers, and furthermore, now the Russians managed to secure the flank, and they can continue moving further and to attack the village of Grodovka from the northeast. So this is approximately the plan of the armed forces of Russian Federation to attack Grodovka from the second direction. Furthermore, as for the southeastern direction, according to pro-Russian mappers, the Russians managed to establish complete control over this part, and currently this is approximately the territory that is already under complete Russian control in Grodovka direction. So this is approximately the territory that was captured by the Russians during the previous 12 hours, and we see that this progress is also significant. Now the Grodovka, now the Russians control around 30 or even more % of the village or city, and the Russians are moving further in the Pokrovsk direction. Now let's talk about the village and the city of Novohrodivka Selidova. Just yesterday we got and we we've been discussing the video of how the Russians entered the southern part of Malyayehaya. Then the Ukrainians made an attempt to counterattack the Russians, but they were destroyed. And today, according to different mappers, the Russians managed to establish complete control over this small settlement. Most likely today the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation will not provide us anything about this progress, because the Russians need time, need few days to secure the area. But the most important from this village, about this village, is that this village used to be a part of the death road for the Ukrainians. If we increase the numbers of updates since the beginning of August, we're gonna see that the majority of vehicles and personal carriers, light vehicles and cars were destroyed exactly along the road between Novohrodivka, Nikolaevka and Novohrodivka. And currently these roads, according to the reports, was cut. So what does it mean? That means, first of all, that the Russians will move the death road to another area. And as I understand, by entering the village of Malyayehaya, the Russians managed to reduce the distance to the next, let's say, main supply arteria, and we're talking about M30 road. And as I understand, during the next few weeks, we're going to receive significant number of geolocations of Russian FPV drone strikes on Ukrainian forces that are using this M30 road between Karlovka and Selidova, and most likely dozens of armored vehicles would be destroyed exactly along this territory. And summarizing everything, we can make a conclusion that currently the Ukrainians who are located in the villages and in this artillery pocket between Mizhova, Kamyshivka, Novozhelana, Zhelana, Zavitne, Pticha and Kalinovo are encircled or even appeared in the cauldron, because I'm not sure they're able to evacuate or to escape this area without suffering significant losses. Now let's move further. According to pro-Ukrainian mappers and according to the geolocations we've received, the Russians resumed their attempts to attack in Kurakhove direction. During the previous night, the pro-Ukrainian mappers confirmed additional progress of the Russians in Krasnogorovka, and according to their report, the Russians are moving along the street towards the western outskirts of the Krasnogorovka city. As for Maximilianovka, the Ukrainian forces of 46th Air Mobile Brigade published the video of how they managed to repel another Russian attempt to attack towards Maximilianovka. Of course, we understand that this video was published by the 46th Brigade, and while watching this video, we will not see any additional progress on the ground. But most likely, there was an additional progress on the ground after this battle. The Ukrainians were attacking and bombing the Russian forces in Marinka, along the road between Marinka and Georgievka, and the edge position that was geolocated took place exactly in this point, on the outskirts of Georgievka towards the village of Maximilianovka. So summarizing everything, I'm sure that the Russians managed to bring additional forces to Maximilianovka itself, and most likely there was additional advance of the armored forces of Russian Federation, and most likely as a result of clashes, the Ukrainians were forced to fall back to the most western outskirts of this village. Now let's talk about the South Donetsk direction. As you can see, nothing happened, and the same story about Vremivka tactical bridgehead, and the same story about the Orekhov direction. So as we can see, the counter-offensives continues, and as a result of Ukrainian more or less successful operation in the Kursk direction, the Western countries, including the United States of America and Germany, announced about additional military package. Germany promised to send by the end of this year, during the rest of this year, additionally 30 Leopards tank, 1,400 personnel carriers, 4 air defense systems IRST, and 2 air defense system Gepard. So all these vehicles will be sent to Ukraine during the next few months until the end of the 2024. Furthermore, the United States of America, according to them, we are like they're using the word like are opened to send the cruise missiles to Ukraine, JASSM, with the let's say explosive part of 450 kilos. Obviously, this is very powerful missile. So we see that no peace talks are going to take place this year, and most likely no peace talks are going to take place the next year. The war has been just escalated to another level, and we have entered most likely at the beginning of the autumn military campaign. And that's it for this video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.